Killua vs Misaka was not a death battle I was expecting much from when it was first revealed. That's not to say I didn't think it would be high quality, I just wasn't very invested in either character and didn't have a ton of reasons to care about the episode outside of my friends working on it. So I went into this one just hoping it would be a fun time that would satisfy fans of Hunter x Hunter and certain scientific railgun. And I can confidently say that it didn't just do that. It soared above my expectations and delivered a great episode that actually made me interested in both fighters' home series, which isn't something that happens too often for me. I will say that this happened more so for Railgun than it did for Hunter x Hunter, which I think mostly came down to the scripts for the analyses. I feel that Killua was portrayed more like a character defined by the people around him than a character defined by his own struggles, whereas Misaka's trauma and conflicts with the corruption of her world seemed more interesting by comparison. That's just my extremely uninformed opinion though, and fans of Killua and Misaka could surely provide more reliable thoughts in that regard. Anyway, I've already gotten quite ahead of myself, so now I'll pivot to dissecting both analyses and giving my detailed thoughts on them. Lousy's script for this episode is consistently entertaining and did a good job at making me want to learn more about the two fighters as the analyses progressed. At first I thought the pacing was a bit strange, with a fair amount of time spent on their abilities sandwiched between core components of their backstories. But I've actually come around to liking that structure, since it feeds the viewer important information alongside the background and humor, which helps to keep them engaged. And besides, it's far from the most egregious example of versus material invading a character's backstory we've seen on the show. And on the topic of humor, I also found the analyses to be pretty consistently funny. Not every joke had me laughing out loud, but I can at least say there weren't any downright awful ones to be found here. Boomstick's insistence on the Killua pun in particular fit right in with my own sense of humor. Owing to my group of friends' influence, I too am well versed in running a once comedic bit straight into the ground. Also, is it just me, or is Ben really giving it his all as Wiz this season? I feel like he's been more animated and varied in his line deliveries than ever before. From Antem's pizza science gag, to Chosen Dragonborn's gothic opening, to his nerding out over Nen and Esper calculations in this episode. I've hardly ever found his performance as Wiz to be outright poor, but it's been a surprisingly poignant element so far this season, so props to him for upping his game. That classic singer Spice is as goated as ever. Focusing back on the analyses though, the research for both Killua and Misaka is really great. Speedy did a good job covering Misaka, and Jacob did excellent with Killua for his first outing as a researcher. You could feel his presence across every part of this episode, especially with the Pokken, Genshin, and Bravely Default clips in the B-roll footage. I don't have a great frame of reference for this, but I feel like no other debut for a research team member has been this personalized toward them, which was super cool to see. And while I'm gassing my friends up over this episode, DJ somehow managed to one-up his work on Ant-Man vs. Atom with this episode's editing. There are so many cool effects and visuals to be seen here, especially when it comes to bringing the manga panels to life. It all makes the analyses and verdict as much of a visual treat as the actual fight. Also, seeing lab rats in the B-roll of Misaka's analysis made me pop off. That show was my shit back during my Disney Channel arc. So yeah, as complete packages, this episode's analysis portions are my favorites of Season 10 thus far. I might be less connected to the characters and their source materials than I was for Antem and Chosenborn, but this was just more solidly put together while lacking the few problems I had with those prior two episodes. It's the Death Battle crew operating at their peak, really, and I'll always enjoy seeing that level of production come out for any matchup. Okay, maybe not any matchup, but the analyses aren't the only part of this episode where the crew is in prime form. Let's get to talking about the fight, on which I have quite a few thoughts I'd like to share. We'll start with the first thing we see, Killua's custom sprites. His are the only fully custom ones Origin made for this episode, and they look amazing. They visually mesh with Misaka sprites as well, which are mostly ripped from Dengeki Bunko fighting Climax, but do have some custom ones worked in that also look very good. More than just their appearance though, the sprites in this fight are so ridiculously well animated. The movements are incredibly fluid and all the custom assets look incredible in motion, so there's next to no jank relative to the sprite work here. Anyway, Killua picks up a badge that belongs to Misaka and taunts her when she asks for it back. It's not a mind-blowing reason for them to fight, but they are teenagers, so a fight breaking out over something this petty isn't too far-fetched. The next major part of the fight I want to cover is the choreography. Going into this episode, I was worried it would fall into the common pitfall of element-based matches where their attacks pretty much fail to do anything of note for most of the fight, like Zuko vs Todoroki and Gray vs Esdeath to a lesser extent. Thankfully, however, this episode manages to circumvent that problem in a clever way. By pitting Misaka's dominance from afar against Killua's superiority at hand-to-hand, they lean into the battle being a contest of wits, maintaining an even playing field without repetitive lightning attacks failing to do much of anything. It's also fitting for a fight between a Hunter x Hunter rep and a Toaru rep to be focused on strategy, since they outlined how Nen can be used to outsmart stronger enemies and how espers are always using their heads mid-fight to utilize their powers. Now let's look more closely at the actual fighting. The beginning on the street is the weakest part of the animation in my eyes, both because there's not a lot of cool back and forth yet, and the actual fighting is kinda weak. Killua's shock and the one punch he throws while using Rhythm Echo don't seem like they do much of anything to Misaka, nor does it seem like that's all he would do against an opponent he's so far been able to blitz effortlessly. But after that is where we start to see intelligent fighting in action. Misaka throws out some iron sand to make Killua reveal his position by walking over it, giving her the opportunity to strike when her foe wasn't expecting her to. I will note that it's not really communicated how she figured out the illusion was sound-based, but I figured that her radar sense indicated that there was only one real Killua, or something to that effect. Bottom line is, it's a bit vague as to how she made that deduction, but she has ways of working around Killua's illusions regardless, so it didn't break my immersion too much. It's once they get on the rooftops that we really start getting into the tactical side of this fight. I already talked about how their opposing approaches to the battle highlight their strategic minds, but laying this out in their thoughts is a good way to emphasize this in a more anime-styled manner. I tend to find fights where strategy and plans are expressed purely through the action to be more impactful, but I can also appreciate this way of expressing intentions, especially when it suits the mediums that the respective characters are from. More of this careful planning is shown as Killua chases Misaka across town, with the latter floating on some rubble and the former basically going full Tony Hawk Pro Skater over the city. Misaka maintains her distance with coin shots before luring Killua into an electric twister, and in response Killua wraps his yo-yos around nearby structures to anchor himself and skate away. This is a cool implementation of Killua's arsenal, though I do wish he got to do more with it since Misaka dodges the one attack made on her with the yo-yos and then they cease to be relevant for the rest of the fight. But now we get to talk about one of my favorite aspects of this animation. Misaka magnetizes the metal yo-yo to pull Killua off the roof, leaving it open for a railgun shot. But he activates Godspeed to break free, launching himself off his board and zooming up the building Misaka is hanging from in a dash that really sells its speed via the sound design and the camera movement. What I love about this is how the aspect of the fight's verticality is used to show us how intense the battle is at any given point. When it's just getting started and neither fighter is too serious yet, it's on ground level. When they start to get serious and use their heads to take advantage of their strengths, it's up on the rooftops and or in midair. And now that they're both fully intent on finishing things, they're fighting on the wall of a building that towers over the rest of the city, isolating them from their familiar surroundings and leaving both with fewer places to run to. It's really smart environmental storytelling, and I wonder how much of it was intentional versus being a happy accident, because it's one of this episode's standout elements as far as I'm concerned. Now we get some cool action on the wall as Misaka uses her iron sand sword to defend against Godspeed Killua. While the vertical fighting here isn't as fluid as it was in Miles vs. Static, it's still a cool sequence thanks to how the music syncs up with the action. Change of Heart is a great track that complements the choreography by constantly changing to suit the moment, like when it ups the drums and makes the guitar line more energetic during the rooftop chase, or when it drops a lot of the other instruments after Killua punches Misaka away, only keeping a bassy synth line as Misaka reappears with her lightning giant. Also, while I'm not familiar enough with Index's music to recognize any motifs from that here, I did notice elements of Killua's theme in the music, which was a really nice touch. Fairwolf did a great job making this song both fun to jam out to on its own, and an asset to the animation that complements basically every scene. Also, speaking of Misaka's lightning giant, who the hell decided this scene needed to go so hard? The way you hear and see the city's power fluctuating as it raises a hand to cover the roof of an entire building is such a raw first appearance. And the construct looks visually flawless with its wickedly cool hand-drawn body constantly flowing with energy and iron sand. The sound of its incessant sparking is also amazing, adding to its imposing scale as it towers in front of Killua. Everything from this point onward is just phenomenal. Misaka's quip during the build-up to her giant railgun shot emphasizes her confidence in her abilities, and the way that Killua leaps right ahead to bounce off it and into the air before it shears the giant building in half is just the coolest shit ever. Then we get both Killua's best line of the fight and one of the coolest custom sprites of the episode back to back as Killua channels the Snake Awakens, accompanied by a really cool snake hiss to really sell the illusion. Giselle Fernandez has done great voicing Killua up to this point, but this is their best line delivery of the entire fight, bar none. You can really feel Killua's murderous intent bursting forth in their voice. It's just really good stuff that still sticks the landing no matter how many times I rewatch this moment. Then Killua fires a huge lightning blast that disrupts the lightning giant and seems to leave Misaka helpless, which Killua capitalizes on with a fake-out kill that genuinely got me on my first watch. However, it suffers from the Madara vs. Aizen issue where the soundtrack has very obviously not concluded by the time it should have if this was the actual death. So it's pretty easy to realize Misaka wasn't actually dead if you were paying attention to the music at this moment. Still really well done though. The fake Misaka explodes into iron sand to reveal the trick, and the heart Killua ripped out of it also dissolves, encasing him in iron sand and sending him into freefall. And here we get my favorite shot of the whole animation. Killua's falling form fades into one of Misaka's arcade coins as she calculates her final shot. This moment is like something out of a movie with how cinematically brilliant it is. It's so smooth and subtle and just incredible. It also doesn't exactly hurt that it's paired with Misaka's best line of the fight. Fenty Kelly Lowe's performance has generally been solid, with just a few deliveries that I thought could have been better here and there. But at the end, she nails the tone of Misaka coldly calculating the angle and distance needed for the killing shot. The killing blow itself isn't anything to write home about, but everything surrounding it is some of the best work done for a sprite fight since SpongeBob vs. Aquaman. And that's everything I have to say about the fight. Damn, what a ride. This surprised me with how much about it I thoroughly enjoyed, though at this point I should really know that the Death Battle crew rarely ever disappoints me, regardless of how attached I am to the characters being used. The conclusion is solid, basically spelling out everything I assumed they would based on what I took from the analyses and the G1 research blog. I was initially going to give this episode a high 8 out of 10, but after thinking it over while writing the script for this review, I came to realize that I was being too hard on it just because it didn't feature characters that I was personally invested in. The best parts of this episode are the elements that make modern death battles in general so great, and so I really cannot rank it lower than a 9 with a clear conscience. It's definitely a lower 9 than Chosen Undead vs. Dragonborn, don't get me wrong, but continuing Season 10's current trend of back-to-back bangers the way this one did is nothing to scoff at. Speaking of continuing the season's highs, holy shit, I'm excited for Stitch vs. Rocket Raccoon. Seeing Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 in theaters recently made me think more about this match, but I did not expect it to show up so soon after its release. Rocket has shot up the rankings in terms of my favorite Guardians of the Galaxy members after Volume 3. Still not number 1 though, love you Drax. And while I don't remember Lilo and Stitch as much as other Disney films that came out during my childhood, I will absolutely be rewatching it now that I have the perfect excuse to. Editor's note, I took the time to watch it in between writing this script and recording this, and yeah, it's really fucking good. I love the found family trope, it's so good. I cannot wait to see what the team does with this episode. I haven't been this excited for a Marvel vs. non-DC matchup since Iron Fist vs. Poe. Anyway, yeah, that's a wrap on my Killua vs. Misaka review. No super long diatribe at the end this time around, though I do want to reiterate something I mentioned on Twitter since it pertains to the next episode. I'll be away on vacation with most of my friend group during the week of Stitch vs. Rocket's release, so I won't be working on my review for it at all until I get back home the following week. I promise to make it worth the wait though. Perhaps there will even be a special reaction to that episode for you all to enjoy. Speaking of which, my Killua vs. Misaka reaction is linked below in the description, so go watch that or I'll send the Zoldyx to your house and make you feel unsafe. Also, go watch Biff and M's reviews, assuming you're not already coming to this one from there. Regardless, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Later!